Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations. Garrett Voss had built his life like he built his structures, methodically, with precision, and designed to last forever. At 35, he owned Voss Construction, a company that had risen from a single truck operation to one of the most respected building firms in Denver. His hands, scarred from years of honest work, could frame a house or draft blueprints with equal skill. Those same hands had held his daughter Lucy the day she was born, and had built the swing set in their backyard where she spent countless hours laughing. Tessa had been different back then. When they met 12 years ago, she was a struggling art student with paint under her fingernails and dreams bigger than her bank account. Garrett had fallen for her passion, her creativity, the way she could see beauty in abandoned buildings that others wanted to tear down. She'd convinced him to restore their first home instead of building new, and he'd watched her transform a decrepit Victorian into something magnificent. But success had changed her. As Garrett's business grew and Tessa transitioned into real estate, using her eye for design to stage million-dollar homes, she began surrounding herself with a different crowd. Her sister Valerie had married into old Denver money, and through Valerie's connections, Tessa started running with people who measured worth by designer labels and trust funds rather than hard work and integrity. The change had been gradual, like erosion wearing away at a foundation. First, it was complaints about Garrett's calloused hands at dinner parties. Then came suggestions that he should hire managers and elevate his brand, instead of still swinging hammers on job sites. The final crack had appeared 6 months ago when she'd started spending 3 evenings a week at an upscale gym, claiming she needed to network with potential clients. Garrett had suspected nothing initially. He trusted his wife, believed in their marriage, and was focused on the biggest project of his career, a luxury residential complex that would cement his company's reputation. He worked 16-hour days, often sleeping at the construction trailer, while Tessa maintained their social calendar and cared for 8-year-old Lucy. Lucy was the light of both their worlds, or so Garrett had believed. She had inherited Tessa's artistic eye and Garrett's practical mind, creating elaborate chalk masterpieces on their driveway and explaining to anyone who'd listen how her daddy's building stood up against earthquakes. She was precocious, observant, and had an unsettling ability to notice things adults tried to hide. The first real warning sign had come 3 weeks ago. Lucy had asked during dinner why Mommy's friend Blake came to the house when Daddy was at work. Tessa had laughed it off, explaining that Blake was a trainer who sometimes helped her prepare marketing materials for luxury properties near his gym. Garrett had accepted the explanation, too tired and too trusting to probe deeper. But Lucy's questions had planted a seed of unease. Garrett began noticing small things. Tessa's phone always face down on surfaces, her sudden interest in late-night property showings, the way she'd started dressing more provocatively for her evening workouts. Still, he'd pushed down his suspicions, telling himself that 12 years of marriage and 8 years of raising Lucy together meant something. The construction business had taught Garrett patience. You didn't rush a foundation or cut corners on structural integrity. You planned, you measured twice, you built to last. He'd applied the same philosophy to his marriage, assuming that solid foundations would weather any storm. He was about to learn how catastrophically wrong he'd been. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. The call came at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that had started like any other. Garrett was reviewing blueprints for the complex's final phase when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Voss? This is Denver General Hospital. Your daughter Lucy has been brought to our emergency department. You need to come immediately. The blueprints scattered as Garrett knocked over his chair, his mind struggling to process the words. What happened? Is she okay? There's been an accident, sir. Please come as quickly as you can. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of worst-case scenarios. Garrett's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white, his mind racing between prayers and curses. He'd left 3 voicemails for Tessa, each more desperate than the last, but she hadn't answered. The emergency room was a chaos of sounds and smells that assaulted his senses. A young doctor with tired eyes found him at the information desk. "Mr. Voss? I'm Dr. Rodriguez. Your daughter fell down the stairs at your home. She has a severe concussion and some internal bleeding. We've moved her to the ICU and are monitoring her closely." Fell down the stairs? Garrett's mind reeled. Their house was a single story. The only stairs were the ones leading to the basement, and Lucy knew she wasn't allowed down there without permission. The paramedics said your wife called 911. She was quite distressed, understandably. She rode in the ambulance with Lucy, but stepped out to make some phone calls. She should be back shortly. Garrett found Lucy in a room that smelled of antiseptic and fear. His vibrant, chattering daughter lay motionless, dwarfed by machines that beeped and hummed around her. Her face was pale except for a dark bruise across her left temple, and seeing her like this unleashed something primal in Garrett's chest. He pulled a chair next to her bed and took her small hand in his calloused one, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "Daddy's here, sweetheart. You're going to be okay. I'm not going anywhere." Tessa arrived 30 minutes later, her makeup smudged and her hair disheveled. She wore her workout clothes, expensive athleisure that cost more than most people made in a week, and seemed genuinely distraught. "Oh God, Garrett, I'm so sorry," she said, collapsing into the chair on Lucy's other side. "I was in the kitchen when I heard the crash. She must have been playing near the basement door. I should have been watching her more carefully." Something in her tone felt rehearsed, but Garrett was too consumed with worry to analyze it deeply. They sat in tense silence for an hour, taking turns holding Lucy's hand and speaking to the doctors who came and went with updates. Then Tessa's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and something shifted in her expression. "I have to go," she said suddenly, standing up. Garrett looked at her in disbelief. "What do you mean you have to go? Our daughter is in intensive care. It's Valerie. She's having her anniversary party tonight, and she's having a complete meltdown about the catering. I'm the only one who can handle the vendors." "Tessa, are you out of your mind?" Lucy could. Garrett couldn't even finish the sentence. "She's stable. The doctor said so, and there's nothing we can do but wait. I'll be back in a few hours." Garrett stood up slowly, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Please don't leave us. Not now." Tessa's face hardened in a way he'd never seen before. "If I'm not there, Valerie's friends will think I don't care about family obligations. These people are important clients, Garrett. You wouldn't understand the social dynamics. I understand that our daughter is fighting for her life. You're being dramatic." She fell down some stairs. Kids recover from this stuff all the time. Tessa grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. "I'll be back later tonight." As her footsteps disappeared down the hallway, Garrett felt something fundamental break inside him. Not just his heart, but his entire understanding of the woman he'd married. He sat back down next to Lucy, his hand trembling as he stroked her hair. "I'm here, baby girl," he whispered. "Daddy's not going anywhere." The hours crawled by. Garrett dozed fitfully in the uncomfortable chair, jerking awake every time a machine beeped or a nurse entered the room. Around midnight, Lucy's fingers twitched in his hand. "Lucy? Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. She tried to speak but could only manage a whisper. "Daddy, I'm here, baby. You're safe now." Lucy's eyes found his, and in them he saw not just confusion but fear. "Daddy, Mommy pushed me because..." Her voice trailed off as exhaustion claimed her again, but those 6 words detonated in Garrett's mind like explosives in a controlled demolition. Everything he'd built his life on, trust, love, family, came crashing down in those few seconds. Mommy pushed me because... Because of what? And why would his wife, the mother of his child, do such a thing? As Lucy slipped back into unconsciousness, Garrett felt a cold clarity settle over him. The construction business had taught him to recognize structural failures before they cause catastrophic collapse. His marriage hadn't just cracked. It had been deliberately sabotaged, and he was going to find out exactly why. Chapter 3: The Blueprint of Betrayal. Lucy remained unconscious for another 18 hours, during which Tessa returned only twice. Once briefly in the morning with coffee and excuses about handling Valerie's crisis, and again that evening with more elaborate explanations about social obligations. Each time, she seemed increasingly agitated when Garrett pressed for details about the accident. "Why was Lucy near the basement stairs?" he asked during her second visit. "You know, she's not allowed down there." "I don't know, Garrett. Kids do stupid things. Maybe she was looking for something." "Looking for what?" "We keep nothing down there but storage and my old tools." Tessa's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with what Garrett was beginning to recognize as relief. "I have to handle another vendor issue. Valerie's party has become a complete disaster." "The party was last night, Tessa." She paused, caught in her lie. "The cleanup, and dealing with the aftermath. You know how these people are." After she left, Garrett called his foreman, Miguel Santos, a man he'd worked with for 8 years and trusted completely. "Miguel, I need you to do something for me without asking questions." "Whatever you need, boss." "Go to my house and look at the basement stairs. Take pictures of everything. The door, the steps, the basement floor. Look for anything unusual. Blood, scratches, anything that seems off." "You want me to break in? I still have my keys." "Tessa doesn't know. I never put them back after the contractor installed our security system last month." Miguel called back 3 hours later. "Boss, you need to see these pictures. Something's not right here." They met at a coffee shop near the hospital, where Miguel showed him photos on his phone. The basement door had fresh scuff marks on the frame. The stairs themselves were clean, too clean, as if they'd been recently scrubbed. But most telling was a photo of the basement floor, where Miguel had used a flashlight to reveal small droplets that had been missed in the cleanup. "That's blood," Miguel said quietly. "And boss, there's something else. I found this wedged behind the water heater." He handed Garrett a small pink beret, one of Lucy's favorites, decorated with tiny butterflies. It was bent and had a small stain that looked disturbingly dark. "She was wearing this yesterday morning," Garrett said, his voice hollow. "I remember because she asked me to help her put it in her hair." Miguel studied his boss's face. "What do you want me to do?" Garrett pocketed the beret. "Nothing yet, but don't mention this to anyone." That evening, as Lucy finally began to wake up more consistently, Garrett was alone with her when she became lucid enough for a real conversation. "Daddy, my head hurts." "I know, sweetheart. The doctors say you're going to be okay, but you need to rest." Lucy looked around the room with growing awareness. "Where's Mommy?" Garrett chose his words carefully. "She had to handle some work things. She'll be back soon." "Lucy, do you remember what happened to you?" Lucy's face scrunched in concentration. "I was looking for my drawing pad, the one with the princess on the cover. I thought maybe it was in the basement storage room. You know you're not supposed to go down there alone." "I know, but I heard Mommy talking to someone down there, and I thought maybe she was looking for my pad too. So I opened the door really quietly to ask her." Garrett's pulse quickened. "Who was Mommy talking to?" "Her friend Blake, the one who comes over when you're at work." They were standing really close together, and Blake was touching Mommy's face like in the movies when people are going to kiss. The words hit Garrett like a physical blow, but he kept his voice steady. "What happened next, sweetheart?" "I started to ask about my drawing pad, but Mommy got really mad really fast. She said I shouldn't spy on grown-ups and that I needed to mind my own business." Blake looked scary angry too. Then Mommy grabbed my arm really hard and started pulling me back up the stairs. Lucy's eyes filled with tears. "I told her she was hurting me, but she kept pulling. When we got to the top, she was breathing hard and looked really upset. She said I had to promise never to tell you about Blake being at our house. She said it would ruin everything and that you might leave us. And then I said I didn't want to keep secrets from you because you taught me that families don't lie to each other." That made Mommy even madder. She was holding my arm really tight, and she said that sometimes little girls who can't keep important secrets get sent away from their families forever. Garrett's hands clenched into fists. "Then what happened?" "I got scared and tried to pull away, but Mommy was holding on too tight. I was crying and saying I wanted my daddy, and that's when she pushed me really hard. I felt myself falling backward, and my head hit the door frame really hard. Everything went black after that." The room seemed to spin around Garrett. His wife, the woman he'd loved for 12 years, the mother of his child, had physically assaulted their daughter to cover up her affair, had deliberately hurt Lucy to protect her secret. Lucy, this is very important. You said Blake looked scary angry. What did you mean? His face got all red, and he stepped toward me like he was going to grab me too. But then Mommy pushed me first. Garrett felt something cold and dangerous settle in his chest. Not only had Tessa hurt their daughter, but she'd done it in front of her lover, who had apparently been prepared to help silence an 8-year-old child. Daddy, did I do something wrong? Is that why Mommy hurt me? Garrett leaned down and kissed his daughter's forehead. No, baby girl, you did absolutely nothing wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make terrible choices, but that's never the fault of children. Never. Are you going to leave us like Mommy said? I'm never leaving you, Lucy. I promise. But Mommy and I are going to have some serious conversations about what happened. As Lucy drifted back to sleep, Garrett stepped into the hallway and called Miguel again. I need you to do something else for me. Find out everything you can about a guy named Blake who works at an upscale gym. Probably somewhere near downtown or Cherry Creek. Personal trainer, good looking, probably drives something expensive. You want me to follow him? I want you to learn his routine. When he works, where he lives, what kind of car he drives, who he hangs out with. Everything. Boss, what are you planning? Garrett looked back through the window at his injured daughter, sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of cold finality he usually reserved for contractors who try to cheat him. I'm going to build something special, Miguel. A reckoning. And like everything I build, it's going to be precise, thorough, and permanent. Chapter 4. Surveillance and Strategy. Over the next week, as Lucy recovered enough to be moved from the ICU to a regular room, Garrett began constructing the most important project of his life, a comprehensive plan to destroy the 2 people who had betrayed and hurt his family. Miguel's reconnaissance had identified Blake Morrison, a personal trainer at Elevate Fitness, an upscale gym in Cherry Creek that catered to wealthy housewives and young professionals with more money than sense. Blake was 28, drove a leased BMW M4, and lived in a trendy apartment complex that charged premium rent for barely adequate space. Most importantly, he had a pattern. He trains clients from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., then usually goes home for a few hours, Miguel reported during one of their coffee shop meetings. 3 evenings a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. He goes to your house around 7 p.m. and stays until about 10 p.m. Always parks 2 blocks away and walks through the alley behind your neighbor's house. Garrett absorbed this information with the same methodical approach he used when analyzing structural problems. What about his background? Born in Phoenix, moved here 3 years ago. No criminal record, but he's got money problems. Behind on his car payments, maxed out credit cards, the whole thing. Word around the gym is that he's been getting involved with married clients who give him gifts to help with his finances. So he's a professional homewrecker. Looks like it. But boss, your wife isn't his first wealthy target. There's a woman named Patricia Henley. Divorced her husband 6 months ago after being caught with Blake. Cost her about $2 million in the settlement. This information sparked an idea in Garrett's mind. Patricia Henley was a name he recognized from Tessa's social circle, someone who'd been quietly ostracized after her divorce scandal. If Blake had a pattern of targeting married women for financial gain, it meant he was vulnerable to manipulation. Meanwhile, Garrett had been conducting his own surveillance of Tessa. Her behavior had become increasingly erratic since Lucy's accident. She was drinking more, spending longer hours away from the hospital, and had started making elaborate plans for Lucy's recovery period. I think we should send Lucy to stay with my mother in Arizona for a few weeks, she suggested during one of her brief visits. The change of scenery would be good for her, and we could focus on getting back to normal. Garrett saw through the suggestion immediately. With Lucy safely out of state, there would be no risk of her sharing any more uncomfortable truths. Lucy needs to be close to her doctors for follow-up appointments. And she needs stability right now, not more upheaval. You're being overprotective. Kids are resilient. Kids who've been assaulted by their mothers need extra care. Tessa's face went white. What are you talking about? She fell down the stairs. Did she, Tessa? Because Lucy's been having some very clear memories about what actually happened. For a moment, genuine fear flickered across his wife's face. Then the mask slipped back into place. She has a head injury, Garrett. Traumatic brain injuries can cause false memories and confusion. The doctors will tell you that. But Garrett had already spoken to Dr. Rodriguez about Lucy's account. While the doctor couldn't make legal determinations, he confirmed that Lucy's cognitive function was intact and her memories of events before the injury would likely be accurate. That evening, Garrett set his plan in motion. He called Tommy Reeves, a private investigator he'd worked with when vetting potential business partners. Tommy was expensive but thorough, and more importantly, he understood that some clients needed results that could withstand legal scrutiny. "I need complete surveillance on 2 individuals," Garrett told him. "Video, audio if you can get it, financial records, communication records, the works. And I need it to be admissible in court. Divorce case, among other things. There's also the matter of child endangerment and assault." Tommy's tone sharpened. "How much danger are we talking about?" Garrett told him about Lucy's injuries and her account of what happened. By the end of the story, Tommy's professional demeanor had shifted to something more personal. "I've got a daughter too," Tommy said quietly. "This Blake character, he was there when it happened?" "According to Lucy, yes, and apparently prepared to help silence her." "Then he's not just an affair partner. He's an accessory to child abuse." That changes the game entirely. While Tommy began his professional surveillance, Garrett decided to take a more direct approach with Blake. He started working out at Elevate Fitness, timing his visits to observe Blake's interactions with clients. What he saw disgusted him. Blake was smooth, charismatic, and utterly predatory. He focused his attention on women who seemed unhappy or neglected, offering them not just fitness training, but emotional support and validation. Garrett watched him work his charm on a recent divorcee, a woman whose husband traveled frequently for business, and most sickeningly, a young mother who complained about feeling unappreciated at home. But Blake's greatest talent was making each woman feel like she was his only special client. He had an uncanny ability to identify their vulnerabilities and exploit them with surgical precision. Garrett began to understand how Tessa had fallen into his trap. After a week of observation, Garrett arranged to be Blake's client. "I'm getting back into shape after spending too much time behind a desk," he told Blake during their first session. "My wife suggested this place. She's been coming here for months and can't stop talking about the results." Blake's smile faltered almost imperceptibly when Garrett mentioned Tessa, but he recovered quickly. "That's great, man. What's your wife's name? I probably know her." "Tessa Voss. Pretty woman, real estate agent. Always talks about her sister's social events." "Oh yeah, Tessa's awesome. Super dedicated to her fitness goals." "You're a lucky guy." Garrett smiled back with equal insincerity. "I definitely am. We've been married 12 years, and I still can't believe she chose a guy like me. Sometimes I wonder what I'd do if I ever lost her." Over the following sessions, Garrett played the role of the oblivious husband perfectly. He complained about working long hours, mentioned his upcoming business trips, and even asked Blake for advice about surprising Tessa with romantic gestures. Blake's responses revealed everything Garrett needed to know. The man had no conscience, no guilt about breaking up a family. In fact, he seemed to enjoy the power dynamic of sleeping with a client's wife while training the husband. But Garrett was gathering more than just information. He was studying his enemy, learning his routines, his weaknesses, his pressure points. Blake was vain, materialistic, and desperately insecure beneath his polished exterior. He needed constant validation and lived beyond his means to maintain an image of success. Most importantly, Blake had no idea he was being hunted. On Friday evening, Tommy called with an update that made Garrett's blood run cold. "I've got them on video," Tommy said. "Your house, your bed, your daughter's accident, all of it." "But Garrett, there's something else. Something that changes everything." "What?" "Blake Morrison isn't just some dirtbag trainer. He's done this before multiple times. And one of his previous targets? Her kid ended up in the hospital too. Different city, different story, but the same pattern. I think your wife and daughter stumbled into something much more dangerous than a simple affair." Chapter 5, The Trap. Tommy's evidence painted a picture that made Garrett's vision blur with rage. Blake Morrison had a history of targeting married women with children, systematically isolating them from their families while bleeding them financially. In Phoenix, a 10-year-old boy had been hospitalized with mysterious injuries after catching Blake with his mother. The case had been quietly settled out of court, with the father accepting a substantial payout to keep the details private. "He's not just a predator," Tommy explained as they reviewed the files in his office. "He's escalating. Each time, the violence gets worse. Your daughter was lucky." Garrett studied the photographs and documents spread across Tommy's desk. "What happened to the other families?" "Destroyed." The Phoenix case ended in divorce. The mother lost custody of her son and had a nervous breakdown within 6 months. Blake moved here right after that settlement. And Tessa doesn't know about his history? No way. He's too smart for that. He presents himself as a young, struggling trainer who's just looking for love. By the time they figure out what he really is, they're too compromised to back out. But there was more. Tommy had tracked Blake's finances and discovered a pattern that revealed the true scope of his operation. He's not just getting gifts from these women. He's blackmailing them. Look at these bank deposits. The financial records showed regular payments from multiple sources over the past 2 years. Patricia Henley, the divorce client Miguel had mentioned, was still making monthly transfers to Blake's account, 6 months after her divorce was finalized. He records them, Tommy continued. Audio, video, probably photos too. Then he uses it to keep them paying long after the relationships end. Garrett felt something savage awakening in his chest. Blake wasn't just destroying his marriage. He was systematically terrorizing women and children for profit. And Tessa, despite being a victim herself, had chosen to protect him over their daughter. "What about the recordings of my wife?" Tommy hesitated. "You sure you want to see them? I need to see everything." The video quality was surprisingly clear. Blake had hidden cameras throughout his apartment, capturing every detail of his encounters with various women. The footage of Tessa was devastating, not just because of the betrayal, but because it showed how completely Blake had manipulated her. In the earliest recordings from 4 months ago, Tessa had been hesitant, guilty, constantly mentioning Garrett and Lucy. But Blake had systematically broken down her resistance, convincing her that her marriage was holding her back, that she deserved better than a blue-collar husband who couldn't appreciate her sophistication. The most damning footage was from the day of Lucy's accident. The basement camera had captured everything. Blake pressuring Tessa to leave Garrett, Tessa's panic when Lucy discovered them, and the horrifying moment when Blake had suggested taking care of the kid problem permanently. "She's going to keep talking," Blake had said on the recording. "Kids don't understand the importance of keeping secrets. Maybe she needs to learn a harder lesson." It was then that Tessa had grabbed Lucy and dragged her upstairs, where the assault had occurred out of camera range. But the audio was clear enough. Lucy's cries, Tessa's shouted threats, and the sickening thud when their daughter's head hit the doorframe. Garrett watched it all, his face carved from stone. When the footage ended, he was quiet for a long moment. "I want copies of everything," he finally said. "And Tommy, I need you to do one more thing. I need you to find out exactly how Blake gets his victims to pay him, and I need contact information for every woman he's blackmailed. What are you planning?" "I'm going to give him the biggest score of his career. And then I'm going to take everything away from him, his money, his freedom, his ability to hurt anyone else." That weekend, Garrett put the first phase of his plan into action. He took Tessa out for an expensive dinner at her favorite restaurant, playing the role of the loving husband trying to reconnect after their trauma. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told her over wine that cost more than most people made in a day. "Maybe Lucy would benefit from spending time with your mother." The change of scenery could help her process what happened. Tessa's relief was palpable. "Really? You'd be okay with that? I want what's best for our daughter. And honestly, maybe we need some time to reconnect as a couple. This whole experience has made me realize how much I've been taking you for granted." He played his role perfectly, expressing guilt about working too much, promising to pay more attention to her needs, even suggesting they plan a romantic getaway once Lucy was settled in Arizona. Tessa bought every word. By the end of the evening, she was more affectionate than she'd been in months, talking excitedly about their future and how this crisis had ultimately brought them closer together. What she didn't know was that Garrett had already spoken to her mother, explaining the real situation and ensuring that Lucy would be safe and loved while he handled the situation at home. Eleanor Winters had been horrified by her daughter's actions and immediately agreed to take Lucy for as long as necessary. That girl was raised better than this, Eleanor had said angrily. I don't know what's gotten into her, but you handle it however you see fit, Garrett. Lucy will be safe with me. The second phase involved Blake himself. During their next training session, Garrett carefully planted seeds of an opportunity too good to resist. I've been thinking about diversifying my investments, Garrett mentioned as Blake spotted him on the bench press. Real estate has been good to me, but I'm looking at some private equity opportunities. High risk, high reward stuff. Blake's interest was immediately piqued. What kind of private equity? A friend of mine is putting together a development deal. Luxury condos in Aspen. The minimum investment is $500,000, but the projected returns are incredible. 30% annually for 3 years. Then they buy out the investors at double their initial investment. It was a complete fabrication, but Garrett delivered it with the confidence of someone who'd actually built successful businesses. Blake's eyes lit up with the kind of greed that had driven him to blackmail vulnerable women. That sounds amazing, man. I wish I had that kind of capital to invest. There might be a way, Garrett said casually. My friend is looking for a few smaller investors to round out the deal. Someone with maybe 50 or 60,000 could get in on a reduced share basis. Blake tried to hide his excitement, but Garrett could see the wheels turning. 50,000 was more than Blake had in liquid assets, but it was exactly the amount he could extract from his blackmail victims if he squeezed them all at once. I might be able to put together that kind of money, Blake said carefully. When would your friend need a decision? Soon, like by next week. These deals move fast. That evening, Tommy called with confirmation that Blake was frantically contacting his victims, demanding immediate lump sum payments. Patricia Henley had already transferred $25,000, and 2 other women had made substantial withdrawals from their accounts. He's liquidating everything, Tommy reported. Your fake investment opportunity has him convinced he can finally make the big score he's been working toward. But Garrett's plan was more complex than simple financial fraud. While Blake was gathering money from his victims, Garrett was gathering something far more valuable. Evidence of every crime Blake had committed and a coalition of his victims who were finally ready to fight back. Patricia Henley had been the first to agree to cooperate once she learned about Blake's history with other families. The others had quickly followed when they realized they weren't alone, that their shame and fear had been weapons Blake used against them. We want to see him destroyed, Patricia had told Garrett during their secret meeting. He's stolen more than money from us. He's stolen our sense of safety, our ability to trust. If you can really stop him, we'll do whatever it takes. By Thursday, Blake had gathered nearly $60,000 and was practically vibrating with excitement during their training session. I've got the money together, he told Garrett. When can I meet your friend? Garrett smiled the cold smile of a predator who'd successfully lured his prey into the perfect trap. Tomorrow night. But Blake, there's something else we need to discuss first. Something about my wife. Chapter 6. The Foundation Crumbles. Blake's face went through a fascinating series of expressions when Garrett spoke those words. Confusion, fear, calculation, and finally, a kind of desperate bravado that confirmed everything Garrett needed to know. Your wife? What about her? She's been different lately. Distant, secretive, spending a lot of time away from home. Garrett kept his voice conversational, almost casual. I'm starting to think she might be having an affair. Blake forced a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Come on, man. Tessa loves you. She talks about you all the time during her workouts. Does she? What does she say? The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Blake was now caught between his arrogance and his self-preservation instincts. He wanted to maintain his cover, but he also couldn't resist the opportunity to twist the knife. Just the usual stuff. How hard you work. How dedicated you are to the business. Nothing that would make me think she's unhappy. That's interesting, Garrett said, adding more weight to the bar. Because she's been talking about you quite a bit at home. Blake this, Blake that. She seems very impressed with your expertise. Sweat was beading on Blake's forehead now, and not from the workout. I try to give all my clients personalized attention. That's what makes a good trainer. I'm sure it is. In fact, I was thinking maybe you could give her some extra sessions. Really focused, one-on-one attention. Maybe at your apartment, where you'd have more privacy to work on her technique. Blake went very still. I don't do private sessions at my place. Gym policy. That's not what Patricia Henley told me. The blood drained from Blake's face. I don't know what you're talking about. Garrett sat up on the bench and looked Blake directly in the eyes. Blake, I think it's time we had an honest conversation. You see, I know exactly who you are, what you've been doing with my wife, and what you did to my daughter. Blake took a step backward, his hand moving toward his phone. But Garrett was faster, grabbing Blake's wrist with the kind of grip that came from 20 years of construction work. I wouldn't do that if I were you. You see, I've spent the last 2 weeks learning everything about you. Your history in Phoenix, your blackmail operation, the way you systematically destroy families for profit. Garrett's voice never rose above a conversational tone, but something in it made Blake go pale. I know about the cameras in your apartment, the recordings you make, the way you use them to bleed women dry for years after you've moved on to fresh victims. You're crazy. I don't know what you think you know, but I know that you were in my basement when my 8-year-old daughter discovered you with her mother. I know that you suggested taking care of the kid problem permanently. I know that you watched my wife assault our child and did nothing to stop it. Blake was shaking now. That's not. She fell down the stairs. No, Blake. She was pushed by her mother to protect you, and you were prepared to hurt her yourself if necessary. Garrett released Blake's wrist and stood up slowly. Even though Blake was younger and theoretically in better shape, he seemed to shrink in the presence of Garrett's controlled fury. Here's what's going to happen, Garrett continued. You're going to meet me tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Not for an investment opportunity. We both know that was bullshit. You're going to bring every recording you've made of my wife, every piece of evidence you have against her, and you're going to delete everything from your servers. And if I don't, Garrett smiled, and it was terrifying. Then Patricia Henley, Sandra Morrison, Kelly Chong, and 3 other women are going to the police with evidence of your blackmail operation. Tommy Reeves has enough documentation to put you away for 10 to 15 years. And that's before we get to the child endangerment charges. Blake's legs seemed to give out, and he sat down heavily on a nearby bench. What do you want? I want you to disappear. Tonight, you're going to return every penny you've stolen from those women. You're going to provide them with copies of everything you used to blackmail them, so they can finally feel safe. And then you're going to leave Denver and never come back. I can't. The money. I don't have it all anymore. Yes, you do. You've been collecting it all week from my fake investment. $60,000 should be enough to cover what you owe Patricia and the others. Consider the rest a penalty fee. Blake's breathing was shallow and rapid. And Tessa is my problem to handle. But Blake, if you ever contact her again, if you ever come near my family again, if I ever hear that you've tried this operation in another city with another family. Garrett leaned down until his face was inches from Blake's. I will find you. I will destroy you. And next time, I won't be nearly so generous with your options. Blake nodded frantically. Okay, I'll do whatever you want. Just don't call the police. The police are the least of your concerns right now. Because, Blake, there's something else you need to understand. I'm not just some cuckolded husband looking for revenge. I'm a man whose child was hurt, whose family was threatened. And men like me, we don't forgive. We don't forget. And we sure as hell don't let threats to our children walk away unpunished. Garrett straightened up and gathered his gym bag. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m., I'll text you the address. Don't be late, and don't even think about running. Because if you do, I'll make sure every woman in America knows exactly what Blake Morrison looks like and what he does to families. As Garrett walked away, he could hear Blake's ragged breathing behind him. The man was finally understanding the true scope of what he'd gotten himself into. He thought he was dealing with another oblivious husband, another easy mark. Instead, he'd awakened something in Garrett that was infinitely more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. That evening, Garrett had dinner with Tessa and Lucy, who was being discharged from the hospital the next day. Lucy was excited about visiting her grandmother, chattering about all the things they were going to do together. Tessa seemed relaxed and happy, completely unaware that her world was about to implode. I'm so glad we're putting this whole nightmare behind us, she said, squeezing Garrett's hand across the dinner table. I feel like we're stronger than ever. Garrett squeezed back, his smile warm and loving. You're absolutely right. By this time tomorrow, everything will be exactly as it should be. As he tucked Lucy into her hospital bed that night, she looked up at him with serious eyes. Daddy, when I go to Grandma's house, are you going to be okay by yourself with Mommy? What do you mean, sweetheart? Sometimes Mommy gets really angry about things, and you're always so nice to everyone. I worry that she might try to hurt you too. Garrett felt his heart break a little at his daughter's innocent wisdom. She was 8 years old and already understood that her mother was dangerous. I promise you, Lucy, that Mommy will never hurt anyone in our family again. Daddy's going to make sure of that. Ow! Garrett kissed her forehead gently. By being smarter and stronger than the people who want to hurt us. By building something they can't tear down. Like your buildings? Exactly like my buildings, baby girl. Exactly like that. Chapter 7, Demolition Day. Friday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that reminded Garrett why he'd fallen in love with Colorado in the first place. He'd spent the day putting Lucy on a plane to her grandmother's, watching his daughter's excited face disappear through the boarding gate, while making silent promises about the world she'd return to. Tessa had been unusually affectionate that morning, talking about their plans for the weekend and how nice it would be to have some alone time together. She'd even suggested they stay in bed all day Saturday, something she hadn't shown interest in for months. I feel like I'm falling in love with you all over again, she'd said, kissing him goodbye. Lucy's accident made me realize how precious our family is. Garrett had kissed her back with all the tenderness he could muster, because despite everything, part of him was still mourning the woman he'd thought she was. I love you too, Tessa. More than you know. Now, as he drove toward the warehouse where he'd arranged to meet Blake, Garrett felt the cold clarity that had sustained him through the most challenging construction projects of his career. When you were building something complex, you couldn't let emotions cloud your judgment. You followed the blueprint, you executed each step with precision, and you didn't move to the next phase until the current one was perfect. Tonight was Demolition Day. The warehouse was one of Garrett's properties, a building he'd purchased 2 years ago with plans to convert it into loft apartments. It was perfect for his purposes, isolated, soundproof, and completely under his control. He'd had Miguel set up cameras throughout the building, ensuring that everything that happened would be documented. Blake arrived exactly on time, his BMW looking absurdly expensive in the industrial parking lot. He was carrying a large duffel bag and kept glancing around nervously as he approached the warehouse entrance. Garrett met him at the door, dressed in work clothes and projecting the calm confidence of a man on his home turf. Blake, good to see you again. Yeah, same here. Look, about what we discussed yesterday. All in good time. Come on in. There are some people I want you to meet. Blake hesitated. People? I thought this was just between us. In a way, it is. Trust me. The main floor of the warehouse had been set up like a conference room, with a long table and several chairs. Sitting around the table were Patricia Henley, Sandra Morrison, Kelly Chong, and 2 other women Blake had blackmailed. At the head of the table sat Tommy Reeves with a laptop and several boxes of files. Blake stopped dead when he saw them, his face going through the now familiar cycle of confusion, fear, and desperate calculation. What is this? This, Garrett said calmly, is a board meeting, and you, Blake, are about to be voted out. Patricia stood up slowly, her face a mask of controlled fury. Hello, Blake. Surprised to see me? I don't know what you people think you're doing, but this is kidnapping. I'm calling the police. By all means, Tommy said, opening his laptop. But before you do, maybe you'd like to see what we'll be showing them. The laptop screen filled with security footage from Blake's apartment. Clear, high-definition video of Blake pressuring Patricia into various sexual acts while secretly recording her. The audio was crystal clear as Blake explained how Patricia's husband would destroy her in their divorce if he ever found out about their relationship. We have hours of this, Tommy continued conversationally, from multiple women, spanning multiple years. Federal prosecutors love this kind of systematic documentation when they're building RICO cases. Blake's hand, which had been reaching for his phone, froze midway to his pocket. But wait, Tommy continued, clicking to another file. There's more. The screen now showed footage from Garrett's basement. Blake and Tessa in passionate embrace, followed by Lucy's innocent interruption, and finally Blake's chilling suggestion about taking care of the kid problem permanently. Kelly Chong spoke for the first time, her voice shaking with emotion. My daughter is 6 years old, Blake. 6. When I heard what you said about Lucy, I realized what you might have done to my family if she'd ever walked in on us. This is crazy, Blake said, but his voice lacked conviction. You can't prove any of this. Sandra Morrison opened one of the boxes on the table and pulled out a thick file. Bank records showing systematic extortion payments. Audio recordings of you threatening to destroy families. Text messages detailing your entire operation. She threw the file on the table in front of him. We can prove all of it. Garrett had remained silent through this presentation, watching Blake's growing panic with the satisfaction of an engineer watching a perfect controlled demolition. Now he stepped forward. Here's what's going to happen, Blake. You're going to sit down at this table, and you're going to make this right. All of it. I don't have to do anything. This whole setup is illegal. Kidnapping, extortion, conspiracy. Actually, Tommy interrupted, Mr. Morrison came here voluntarily to conduct a business transaction. We have him on security footage entering the building of his own free will. Everything that happens from this point forward is simply a group of concerned citizens helping to resolve some financial disputes. Garrett pulled out a chair and gestured for Blake to sit. The choice is yours, Blake. You can cooperate with us tonight and walk out of here with a chance to start over somewhere else. Or you can lawyer up, and we'll let the federal prosecutors sort it out. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your cross-state operation and the child endangerment charges. Blake sat down heavily, the duffel bag sliding off his shoulder. What do you want? Patricia leaned forward. We want our money back. All of it with interest. We want every recording you made destroyed, added Kelly. We want every photograph, every piece of evidence you've used to terrorize us, said Sandra. And we want you to disappear, finished Tommy. Permanently. Blake looked around the table at the faces of his victims. Women he'd systematically abused and exploited, now united against him. I can't pay everyone back. I don't have that kind of money. Garrett smiled coldly. Actually, you do. You see, Blake, while you've been running your little blackmail operation, I've been conducting an audit of your assets. Did you know that extortion proceeds are subject to civil forfeiture? That means these ladies are entitled to recover not just what you stole from them, but everything you bought with their money. Tommy slid a document across the table. Your BMW, your apartment contents, your gym equipment, your jewelry, even your clothes, it's all bought with stolen money. We've already filed liens against everything. But there's good news, Garrett continued. If you cooperate tonight, we'll let you keep enough to buy a bus ticket and start over somewhere else. If you don't, he shrugged. Well, federal prison doesn't have a great retirement plan. Blake stared at the papers, his hand shaking. You're destroying my life. Patricia's voice was ice cold. You destroyed ours first. Children, Blake, Kelly added. You threatened children. The weight of his situation finally seemed to penetrate Blake's narcissistic delusions. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time since Garrett had known him, he looked genuinely defeated. What exactly do you want me to do? Garrett pulled a chair up next to Blake and sat down. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of a man who'd built an empire from nothing. First, you're going to transfer every penny in that bag to accounts controlled by Tommy, who will distribute it fairly among your victims. Second, you're going to provide access to all your recording equipment and delete everything in front of us. Third, you're going to sign a confession detailing your entire operation. And if I do all that, then you get to leave Denver tonight. You'll have exactly enough money for a bus ticket to whatever city you choose, as long as it's at least 1,000 miles away. You'll agree to never contact any of these women again, never return to Colorado, and never run this type of operation anywhere else. Blake was quiet for a long moment, staring at the table. And if I refuse? Tommy answered with the tone of someone reading a grocery list. Federal charges for wire fraud, extortion, interstate transportation of stolen property, conspiracy, and accessory to child abuse. You'll be looking at 20 to 25 years minimum. Plus, Patricia added with vicious satisfaction, we'll make sure everyone in whatever prison you end up in knows exactly what you did to children. Blake closed his eyes and took a shuddering breath. When he opened them again, something fundamental had broken inside him. Where do I sign? Chapter 8, Control Burn. 3 hours later, Blake Morrison ceased to exist in Denver, Colorado. He'd signed a confession, transferred the money, and provided access to his entire blackmail operation. Tommy's technical team had spent 2 hours wiping every server, every backup, every hidden camera. The women who'd been terrorized for years watched with grim satisfaction as their digital chains were finally broken. Blake had left the warehouse with exactly $200, a bus ticket to Portland, and a signed agreement that would result in federal charges if he was ever found within 1,000 miles of Colorado again. He'd looked like a broken man as he walked away, carrying a single backpack containing the few possessions they'd allowed him to keep. Think he'll actually stay away? Patricia asked as they watched his taillights disappear. If he's smart, Garrett replied. But if he's not, he'll discover that some problems don't go away when you change cities. The women had thanked Garrett with a mixture of gratitude and awe. They'd never imagined that their nightmare could end with such decisive finality. Patricia had lingered after the others left, studying Garrett with curious eyes. I thought my ex-husband was ruthless in business. But what you just did, she shook her head. That was surgical. Blake never saw it coming. Blake was sloppy. He got greedy and started believing his own hype. That makes men like him easy to trap. And your wife? What happens to her? Garrett's expression hardened. Tessa made her choices. Now she gets to live with the consequences. Patricia nodded knowingly. The affair was one thing, but what she did to Lucy was unforgivable. Good luck, Garrett. I hope your daughter knows how lucky she is to have a father like you. After everyone left, Garrett and Miguel spent an hour cleaning the warehouse and removing all traces of the evening's activities. They worked in comfortable silence, two men who'd shared enough job sites to communicate without words. Boss, Miguel finally said as they locked up the building, what you did tonight, Blake had it coming. But Tessa's still your wife. Lucy's still her mother. That's going to be complicated. Garrett looked up at the star-filled sky, thinking about his daughter safe in Arizona and the conversation he'd have to have with her eventually. Miguel, have you ever had to demolish a building that looked solid from the outside, but was rotten underneath? Sure. Termites, water damage, bad foundation work. Sometimes the whole structure is compromised even though it looks fine. What do you do in that situation? Tear it down to the foundation and start over. It's the only way to build something that will last. Garrett nodded. That's exactly what I'm doing. When Garrett arrived home at midnight, Tessa was waiting for him in the living room, wearing the silk nightgown she'd bought for their honeymoon 12 years ago. She'd prepared his favorite dinner, opened an expensive bottle of wine, and had clearly gone to great lengths to create a romantic atmosphere. There you are, she said, rising to kiss him. I was starting to worry. How did your meeting go? Very well. We reached a complete understanding with all parties involved. Tessa led him to the dining room, where candles flickered and soft music played. I thought we could have a proper celebration. Just the two of us, no distractions, no stress. Like old times. Garrett played along, allowing her to serve him dinner and pour wine while she talked about their future. She'd clearly spent the day planning what she saw as a new beginning. A romantic reconciliation after the trauma of Lucy's accident had brought them closer together. I've been thinking about what you said about us needing time together, she said, settling into the chair next to him. Maybe we could take that trip to Italy we've always talked about. Now that Lucy's doing better, we deserve some time to reconnect. Italy sounds wonderful. When were you thinking? Next month? I could arrange for Lucy to stay with my mother a little longer, just to make sure she's completely recovered before she comes home. Garrett continued eating, his expression pleasant and engaged. Tessa, I had an interesting conversation with Blake today. Tessa's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. Blake? Why would you be talking to Blake? He's been training me for the past 2 weeks. Didn't you know? The color drained from Tessa's face, but she forced a smile. Oh, that Blake. Yes, of course. How silly of me. I didn't realize you've been working out there. Very interesting man. Full of surprises. In fact, he told me the most fascinating story about what happened in our basement the day Lucy was hurt. Tessa's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood. I don't know what you mean. Garrett reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small recording device on the table. Blake was very thorough in his documentation. Would you like to hear what really happened, or would you prefer to tell me yourself? Tessa stared at the device as if it were a venomous snake. Garrett, I can explain. I'm sure you can. You always were creative with explanations. He pressed play on the recorder. Lucy's voice filled the room, small and frightened. Mommy, you're hurting me. Then Tessa's voice, sharp with panic. You need to mind your own business. You can't tell Daddy about Blake being here. Lucy, crying now, but families don't lie to each other. Daddy says, sometimes little girls who can't keep important secrets get sent away from their families forever. Lucy's scream, the sound of impact. Silence. Garrett turned off the recorder. Tessa was shaking, tears streaming down her face. She was going to ruin everything, Tessa whispered. You don't understand. Blake and I, it's not what you think. He loves me. He understands me in ways you never have. So you assaulted our daughter to protect him. I didn't mean to hurt her. I panicked. She was going to tell you, and I knew you'd never understand. Garrett stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. You're right, Tessa. I don't understand. I don't understand how a mother can hurt her child to protect her lover. I don't understand how a woman can choose a predator over her family. And I don't understand how the woman I loved for 12 years could become someone I don't recognize. Tessa reached for him desperately. Please, Garrett. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. I love you. I love Lucy. Blake doesn't mean anything to me anymore. Blake is gone, Tessa. He left Denver tonight and won't be coming back. Gone? What do you mean gone? I mean he's out of our lives permanently. The question now is what happens to you. Tessa's face cycled through confusion, fear, and finally a kind of desperate calculation. You can't prove anything. It's my word against a recording that could have been edited. Garrett smiled, and it was the coldest expression Tessa had ever seen on his face. Actually, I don't need to prove anything. Because you see, Tessa, I'm not the police. I'm not a judge or a jury. I'm just a husband and father who's been betrayed by the person he trusted most in the world. What are you saying? I'm saying that your marriage, your life as you know it, ends tonight. Tomorrow, you'll find that the bank accounts are frozen, the credit cards are canceled, and your name has been removed from all our properties. You'll discover that I've filed for divorce and emergency custody of Lucy, with documentation of your assault on our daughter. Tessa's face went white. You can't do that. Half of everything is mine. Not when you've forfeited your rights by committing felony child abuse. Not when you've been having an affair and using marital assets to support your lover. And certainly not when your husband has documented evidence of all of it. I'll fight you. I'll hire the best lawyers. With what money? And Tessa, even if you could afford legal representation, do you really want this to become public? Do you want everyone to know what kind of mother you really are? The fight went out of Tessa like air from a punctured balloon. She collapsed back into her chair, the reality of her situation finally penetrating her delusions. What do you want from me? Garrett pulled an envelope from his jacket and placed it on the table next to the recorder. Divorce papers. You'll sign them tonight, agreeing to my terms. No alimony, no claim on my business or properties, and supervised visitation with Lucy only after you've completed a court-ordered psychological evaluation and anger management program. And if I refuse, then I release the recording to the police, the local news, and every social media platform I can find. Your sister's social circle will know exactly what kind of person you are. Your real estate career will be over, and you'll face criminal charges for child abuse. Tessa picked up the papers with shaking hands, scanning the terms that would reduce her from successful real estate agent and wife of a prominent businessman to essentially nothing. This is vindictive, cruel. This is justice, Tessa. This is what happens when you betray your family and hurt a child. She's my daughter too. Is she? Because a real mother would have protected her child, not assaulted her to cover up an affair. Tessa signed the papers without reading them fully, her signature shaky and barely legible. When she finished, Garrett collected the documents and stood up. "You have until noon tomorrow to pack whatever personal belongings you can carry and leave this house. The lots will be changed at 12:01 p.m. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. You made your choices, Tessa. Now you get to live with them." As Garrett walked toward the stairs, Tessa called after him one last time. "I loved you, Garrett. I really did." He paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked back at her. This stranger wearing his wife's face, sitting in the ruins of the life she'd destroyed. "No, Tessa, you love what I could give you. You loved the security, the lifestyle, the social status. But you never loved me enough to be faithful, and you never loved Lucy enough to protect her. Real love requires sacrifice, loyalty, and putting your family before yourself. You're incapable of all three." Chapter 9. New Foundations. 6 months later, Garrett stood in the backyard of his house, watching Lucy play on the swing set he'd built for her 4th birthday. She was laughing, her hair flying in the wind, completely absorbed in the simple joy of flying through the air. The dark bruise on her temple had healed without a trace, but the emotional scars had taken longer to fade. "Higher, Daddy. Push me higher." Garrett obliged, marveling at his daughter's resilience. Children, he learned, were remarkably adaptable when they felt safe and loved. Lucy had thrived during her time with her grandmother, and since returning to Denver, she'd shown no signs of the trauma that had nearly destroyed their family. The therapy had helped. Dr. Sarah Chun, a child psychologist recommended by Dr. Rodriguez, had worked with Lucy to process what had happened and understand that her mother's actions weren't her fault. Lucy now understood that some adults made bad choices, but that didn't mean all adults were dangerous. Dr. Chun says Mommy was sick in her feelings. Lucy had explained to Garrett with the matter-of-fact wisdom of an 8-year-old. She says sometimes people's feelings get so mixed up that they do things that hurt other people, even people they love. "What do you think about that?" Garrett had asked. "I think Mommy forgot how to be a good mommy. But you never forget how to be a good daddy." The legal proceedings had been swift and decisive. Tessa had honored the divorce agreement, perhaps understanding that fighting it would only make her situation worse. She'd moved to Phoenix, where she was supposedly rebuilding her life and undergoing court-mandated therapy. She was allowed supervised video calls with Lucy twice a month, but Lucy showed little interest in these conversations. "She talks to me like I'm a stranger," Lucy had confided to Garrett after one particularly awkward call. "Like she doesn't remember that I'm her daughter." Garrett had gently explained that sometimes adults needed time to figure out how to be better people, and that Lucy shouldn't feel responsible for her mother's journey. The most important thing was that Lucy felt safe, loved, and protected. Blake Morrison had vanished completely. Tommy's contacts in Portland reported that he'd lasted exactly 3 weeks in that city before disappearing again. There were rumors that he'd tried to set up the same operation with a different identity, but word of his methods had somehow reached his new targets before he could establish himself. Blake had learned the hard way that the internet made it very difficult for predators to simply start over with clean slates. "Boss," Miguel called from the back porch, interrupting Garrett's thoughts. "Your 3 o'clock appointment is here." Garrett gave Lucy one final push and headed inside, where a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit was waiting in his home office. Richard Collins was a successful attorney whose wife had recently confessed to an affair. He'd heard about Garrett through carefully worded recommendations from Patricia Henley and the other women who'd become something of an informal support network. "Mr. Voss, I'm not sure exactly how to begin this conversation," Richard said as they shook hands. "Patricia Henley said you might be able to help with a delicate situation." "What kind of situation?" "My wife has been having an affair with our neighbor. A man who's done this before, apparently. He has a history of targeting married women, and I'm concerned about what he might do if I confront him directly." Garrett gestured for Richard to sit down. "Tell me everything." Over the next hour, Richard laid out a story that was depressingly familiar. His wife's lover was a charismatic con man who specialized in seducing wealthy women, isolating them from their families, and systematically draining their resources. The parallels to Blake's operation were unmistakable. What exactly are you looking for, Richard? I want him gone. I want my wife to understand what she's gotten herself into. And I want to make sure he can't do this to another family. Garrett leaned back in his chair, studying Richard's face. The man was desperate, but not vindictive. He genuinely wanted to save his marriage and protect other potential victims. This isn't about revenge for you. No, it's about justice and protection. My wife isn't a bad person, Mr. Voss. She's a victim who doesn't understand what's happening to her. Garrett nodded slowly. Over the past 6 months, he'd received similar requests from 7 other men in situations ranging from affairs to financial fraud to domestic abuse. Word was spreading quietly through Denver's business community that Garrett Voss was someone who could solve problems that conventional methods couldn't touch. I'll look into your situation, Garrett told Richard. But you need to understand something. I don't just make problems go away. I make sure they can't come back. That requires precision, patience, and absolute commitment to seeing things through to the end. Understand, do you? Because once we start down this path, there's no changing your mind halfway through. These men are predators, and predators only understand one thing: superior force applied with overwhelming precision. Richard's jaw tightened. My wife is a good woman who's been manipulated by a professional. Our children love their mother, and they deserve the chance to have her back. If you can make that happen, I'm committed to whatever it takes. After Richard left, Garrett sat in his office thinking about the direction his life had taken. He'd built a successful construction business by following simple principles: identify problems, develop comprehensive solutions, and execute with flawless precision. Those same principles had served him well in dealing with Blake and Tessa. Now, apparently, they were serving other families as well. Tommy knocked on the office door frame. How'd it go with Collins? His situation is manageable. The target is sloppy, overconfident, and has left a trail of evidence that should make things straightforward. You're getting quite a reputation, you know. Patricia Henley isn't exactly discreet about what you did for her and the others. Garrett shrugged. Good men need to know that there are options when the system fails them. When their families are threatened by people who hide behind legal technicalities and social manipulation. And you're okay with being that option? Garrett looked out the window at Lucy, who was now drawing chalk pictures on the driveway while singing to herself. She was safe, happy, and free from the fear that had shadowed her after the incident with Tessa. That was all that mattered. I'm okay with protecting families, Tommy. I'm okay with making sure predators face consequences for their actions. And I'm okay with building something that lasts. Tommy nodded, understanding that this was bigger than revenge or vigilante justice. This was about creating a network of protection for people who had nowhere else to turn. What do you need for the Collins situation? Full background on the target. Financial records, relationship history, communication patterns. The usual. I'll have it by Monday. That evening, as Garrett tucked Lucy into bed, she looked up at him with serious eyes. Daddy, are you happy? What do you mean, sweetheart? You seem different than before. Not sad like when Mommy first went away, but different. Like you're thinking about important things all the time. Garrett smoothed her hair back from her forehead. I am thinking about important things. I'm thinking about keeping you safe and helping other people keep their families safe too. Like a superhero? Garrett chuckled. Not exactly like a superhero. More like an architect who builds protection instead of buildings. Lucy considered this seriously. I think that's even better than a superhero. Superheroes just fight bad guys. But you make it so the bad guys can't hurt people anymore. Where did you get so smart? From you, Daddy. You taught me that if something is broken, you don't just fix it. You build it stronger so it can't break the same way again. As Garrett turned off Lucy's light and closed her door, he reflected on his daughter's words. She was right. He wasn't just fighting bad guys. He was building something permanent, something that would protect families long after individual threats had been neutralized. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Voss, I got your name from friend. I have a situation with my daughter's teacher that the school won't address. Can we talk? Garrett looked at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Call my office Monday morning. We'll set up a meeting. He built his construction business from nothing, creating structures that would stand for generations. Now, he was building something else entirely, a network of protection for families who had nowhere else to turn when the system failed them. Some men built empires for profit or power. Garrett Voss was building something more important, a foundation of justice that predators couldn't shake and protection that families could rely on when everything else failed. It was the most important construction project of his life. And like everything Garrett built, it was designed to last forever. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.